taping the session, but I just want to let you know we are taping today. I would particularly like to extend a special welcome to Michelle, Greg's wife, who's with us today, and Greg's sister Christina and cousin Iris, who have also made the journey to join with us today. So thank you so much for joining with us today. I also want to thank two of Greg's students. I know I'm going to get his name wrong, Hemong and Marissa. They have been moving among all of you, passing out cards. We would greatly appreciate it if before you leave here today, if you could write a memory of Greg, a message, something for Michelle to keep and to remember with her. So if you did not get a card, they'll make sure that you get a card, and please take a couple minutes to write something. It's so important for, particularly for Michelle, to have these memories and the rest of his family. Finally, with great sadness, and I know some of you already know this, I must let you know that Dennis Carlson, who was a scheduled participant in this session, died peacefully a couple weeks ago after a long illness. I know that you will keep Dennis's family, friends, and colleagues in your thoughts as we honor and remember Greg today. Greg died in late December, right before the new year. I'm sure you will understand when I tell you that the last days of 2014 and the first days of 2015 were exceedingly difficult ones for me and everyone who knew and loved Greg. In those first very difficult days, a small group of us were corresponding regularly by email, trying to console each other, find hope, and to bridge the vast geographical distances that separated us. In one of those emails, Warren Critchlow, who could not join us in person today, but is with us still, shared a New Year reflection that a musician, Joe Henry, some of you may know him, had posted on Facebook. I share it now only in part, as Joe's reflections capture the essence of what we hope to do in our time today, to help and support each other as we remember, honor, cry, and laugh together as a community. Many of you, I'm sure, remember hearing about the incident in Perth, Australia, that Joe writes about. Only days ago, I watched a brief clip wherein a group of travelers leaned in with hands
One question email, can we talk? This wasn't out of the ordinary, though both of us were constantly on email. Our electronic exchanges were very brief. We preferred talking on the phone. I was out of the country and couldn't call him, so I emailed him back. Let's Skype, how about in an hour? He immediately replied, that works. It was a Skype chat similar to the ones we've had numerous times over the years. One of us, this time Greg, wanted to get the other's advice about something. He needed help figuring things out. Unlike our previous chats, he didn't have time, although we Skyped for an hour, to discuss the other things we usually talk about. What's going on in our lives and careers, and just checking in with each other. Our conversation ended and I headed back to my conference and of course checked email from time to time. I got another email from Greg thanking me for listening to him and apologizing for our past two conversations being focused on him. I immediately thought, oh, I must have given him good advice, since we usually don't thank each other after our exchanges. But I also thought, I can't even count how many times our conversations have been mostly about about me and my issues, nothing to apologize about. I replied simply and jokingly, no worries, next time it's all about me. Greg was incredibly considerate of others. He often made sure he knew what was going on with me and constantly found ways to be helpful. Even though we had very different scholarly interests, I turned to him often for his invaluable insights and suggestions. I frequently relied on him for support and comfort. He was a deeply caring friend and colleague. I know many in this room, and so many others who couldn't be here today, considered him to be the same. He had a keen interest and unique ability in reaching across different communities, both in his professional and personal life, to establish meaningful relationships with others, and to locate opportunities in diverse spaces for advancing our understandings in multiple ways and our efforts on multiple fronts. We borrowed a quote from James Baldwin to use as the title of the session, not only to represent the influence that Baldwin had on Greg's life and work, but also to reflect this extraordinary interest and ability that impacted and continues to impact many of our lives and work. I echo Nadine to thank you for being here today to celebrate and honor Greg. Now I would like to turn it over to Angela.
Hello everyone, my name is Brian Casemore.
My name is Eve Tuck. We keep shrinking from this task to name out loud what Greg has meant to us, what he means beyond us, beyond his years and ours. We didn't actually know each other before we started working on this presentation. And even now, Greg is bringing people together to think and to feel, to make sense and meaning. The point of grief is not to get through it, back to some old version of ourselves. Grief, yes, is a form of patience, which is maybe the best thing worth quoting of Robert Frost. But grief is also a process of forced change. We have learned from each other about our own resistances to this change, to being in the world, writing in the world, and reading in the world without Greg in it too. We were always writing to him. Who are we as writers now without him? This is still emerging, yet he will be part of whatever comes next too. We've crafted our contribution to this commemorative session for Greg as a short series of call and response moments, each posing a question, eliciting response from those of you who have gathered here. And then we'll do some reframing of that question in a way that expands a sense of the significance of Greg's life and work.
Here's our first question. How has Greg been a part of your AERA experience? Did you have an opportunity to communicate with him, to learn from him in meetings and sessions? Did you seek his counsel or collaborate with him in any way? If you feel comfortable doing so, stand if Greg was a part of your AERA. It's well over half the room standing among us. Thank you. Take your seats. Let's reflect on Greg's significant contributions to this conference, and especially the space of AERA. So many engage AERA as a site of validation and legitimation. This organization confers expertise and prominence. It conveys who is worthwhile. We want to remember Greg by encouraging thought about AERA as he seemed to engage it, as a sign of mentorship friendship, and professional renewal? How might we use the space of AERA as more than an opportunity to collect lines for our vitas? How might we provide for one another the conditions of professional renewal that Greg provided for us?
Here's our next question. How many of us remember Greg for his generosity, kindness, and humility? You might show this by raising your hand. So nearly everybody in the room has their hand raised, and thank you, you can put your hands down. We too have always been moved by Greg's generosity. Yet we want to remember Greg by encouraging thought about these dimensions of his character, not as indications that he was merely a good guy, but as evidence of his deeply considered ethics and politics. We know now, but perhaps not before, that questions of freedom were at the heart of Greg's philosophical pursuits. How might we understand his generosity as an extension to his ongoing inquiries on freedom? Greg engaged in generosity that was carefully theorized. This carefully contemplated and enacted generosity was foundational to his ongoing practices of freedom.
Here's our final question. How many of us remember Greg for his capacity to make teaching, intellectual labor, and professional engagement appear easy? We won't ask you to stand or raise your hand, but quietly reflect on the ways that Greg may have made it all look very easy.
We want to remember Greg by challenging any static sense of his professional labor and personal identity, and by encouraging thought about the tensions, vulnerabilities, and complexities within his work.
About the social and subjective conditions he engaged with profound courage and insight to move us, to move the field.
I'm Senior Publisher for the U.S. Education Program at Routledge. I am ordinarily on that side of the AERA dais, so I hope that my authors and friends will take pity on me for being this anxious up here. But if there's one author I'd be willing to do it for, it's Greg. I had the great pleasure and privilege of being Greg's editor, collaborator, and friend for the better part of 15 years. In order to give a sense of the scope of Greg's influence on both myself and the publishing programs I've represented, I need to give a little bit of background on myself. My own background isn't in education, it's in English. I had been working on my own graduate studies in Columbia's English department when I began working at Teachers College Press. I was in the process of trying to marry my own worlds of studies with my new world of education. I think I naively thought that they had to be completely separate spheres. So in the midst of that, the reviews came back for this unbelievable project. It was Reading and Teaching the Post-Colonial, a book co-authored between Greg and Cameron McCarthy. And that book is all about taking themes of education and literature and art and marrying them all together. It was literally one of the first projects I was exposed to at Teachers College, and to this day I remain very grateful that the director, my friend and mentor, Carlson, let me run with it completely. The project would have been brilliant with or without me, but it was one of those moments life hands you. Just when I needed a guide from one segment of academia to another, who should I be introduced to but Greg? This unbelievable interdisciplinary mind showed me from day one how vital and powerful a field of study education was going to be. It's no exaggeration to say I fell in love with my new adopted field from the get-go because of Greg and the scholarship he introduced me to. Greg's honestly the most prolific mind I've ever been in contact with. He could speak as eloquently about curriculum theorists or Frank Lloyd Wright to phenomenology or Tupac. But he was also exceptionally generous in how he shared that information. He never spoke down to me if I needed him to break down a concept, and I never felt embarrassed to admit to him that I didn't know the scholar he was referencing. In many ways, Greg became my teacher, helping me understand schools of thoughts in my new discipline, what scholars to read, or sessions to attend. When I moved a few years later from Teachers College to Routledge, the fates didn't let me down again. I started just a few days before AERA, in Chicago as a matter of fact, and I had a schedule handed to me by the woman who had hired me. It was the first appointment she had set up on my behalf, but one with Greg and Nadine to talk about their book, Learning to Labor in New Times. Greg was once again my bridge, this time between one press and another. One of my jobs as an acquisitions editor is to spot talent and essentially find ways to convince that talent to work for my press. At this point, it was clear Greg was not only brilliant, but also had an extraordinary ability to make genuine connections within the community. Being so well-read and engaged, he had a pulse on the topics and conversations of the day. He was also incredibly dedicated to the field and to the work. So over lunch one day at a different AERA, I threw out the idea that he should be a series editor for us, and I think he literally jumped. That became the Critical Youth Studies series.